Hi everyone. In Module 3, we're going to consider the different ways in which education research has been approached over the past century, and the philosophical and theoretical undercurrents that have supported or challenged changing approaches to educational research. I want to say up front that many of the concepts in the readings and videos and the language around them are difficult when first encountered, and there's a lot packed into this module. For some of the more complex terms, you can use reputable online sources like the Stanford Dictionaries of Sociology and Philosophy, for example, to help with some of the language and concepts, or just Google it. There's lots there. And if you still have questions, I'm more than happy to talk to you about them. And I'm going to be talking about some of the concepts in this video as well. Because of the breadth of the content in this video is, or in this module rather, this video is longer than usual. And I hope that it's helpful to you in sorting through and understanding some of the key ideas and concepts, but I'll apologize up front for the length of it. Before we move on, I'd like to talk a bit about the assignments in Module 3. First is the discussion forum, for which you'll follow the usual process. And by that I mean the process that you probably followed in most of the other courses that you've taken. By posting your initial initial response in a timely way, that will give your colleagues ample time to respond on your thread. So if you can watch those due dates, that would be really helpful, and try to be a little bit ahead of them, especially when you're putting your first response down. And each of you in your group needs to be sure that each of your colleagues has an opportunity to learn from your comments on your thread. And that doesn't mean that you have to respond to everybody in your group, although that would be wonderful if you have the time and energy to do that. But we'll be watching for those who haven't had a response, and so that everybody has an opportunity to have one or two responses from their colleagues to the ideas that they put out there. And I'll be responding as well to some of the threads. For more details about part 1 of the annotated bibliography assignment, which is the second assignment for this particular module, I strongly suggest you watch the video on eClass. Please keep in mind that the assignment is a maximum of 5 to 7 pages, not including the title page, that it needs to be double spaced in a font size that is readable, 12-point font, for example, Calibri or Times New Roman, those sorts of fonts. And please do not submit as a PDF. I would prefer that you submit it as a Word doc. If you need another format, please check with me first to be sure that I'm going to be able to respond to you using that format, or that I can download it using my computer. When it gets a little exotic, then sometimes I have problems giving you the same kind of feedback and clarity of feedback as I would if you submit it as Word doc. I am conversant with some of the different formats, but sometimes my computer is the problem, and it won't convert properly. So, and do not submit as a PDF, because I cannot respond to a PDF. I can't do the kind of editing responses and so on that are helpful to you in improving your writing and the clarity of the concepts and that sort of thing. Okay, oops, sorry. Goodness. Okay, there we go. Egan, Guba, and von Lincoln were among the first, and certainly the most well-known, to challenge the dominance of positivism in education research. Guba and Lincoln's challenge to positivism was deeply influential because it offered a strongly argued and philosophically informed response to the dominance of positivism. Now, what's positivism? And you've probably had this conversation in other courses, but in case you haven't, positivism is a form of or a philosophical and theoretical perspective in which whatever is being examined needs to be observable. It needs to be, the researcher needs to be able to account for what they're observing using some kind of numbered approach. So it's a quantitative approach. and it's something that it must be observable in some kind of way. Now, Guba and Lincoln were actually married to one another and did exceptional work together for many years. Egan Guba died, I think about four years ago, perhaps. And Ivana Lincoln continues her work as a scholar of research and has been very influential in her own way as well. The Western approaches to research that Guba and Lincoln explore, however, were critiqued by Indigenous scholars who didn't find a place for their voice in educational research that was congruent with their experience of the world. Since the publication of Guba and Lincoln's influential paper, Indigenous scholars like Donald and Steinhauer have worked to improve or to provide an epistemology that speaks to and informs a deeper understanding of an Indigenous worldview. Both Dwayne Donald and Evelyn Steinhauer are Indigenous scholars at the University of Alberta. Although each approached their research differently, both bring an Indigenous worldview to their work and talk about what that looks like and means to them in the papers you're going to be reading. So let's begin by exploring three key concepts in Guba and Lincoln, as well as the Nurse Killam videos, which I think you'll find very helpful. The first is ontology, which considers the nature of being, what things are, or the thing itself. Now, what do we mean by the thing itself or the nature of being? Well, ontology is interested in what is the essence of the thing under examination, or what is the nature of reality. For example, we might consider an object such as a table. We can touch it, feel it, enumerate its properties, and we can be confident that those properties aren't going to change if we're not there. The table continues to exist. Tables may come in many forms, and if you've been shopping for one recently, you might have found one with thick, ornate legs, metal legs, wide or narrow tops, made of wood or plastic or stone, etc. But no matter what they're made of or the shape that they take in many ways, we know a table and can identify one because of its essential nature, its essence, its tableness, if you will, which in this case is physical. However, the ontology of concepts such as thinking, learning, memory, discipline, play, etc., which are a part of the social sciences, like education, are more problematic. How do we come to an understanding of the thing itself when it's not available to us for physical examination? What is the essence or nature of something that is more nebulous in nature? Ontology is the study of such questions. So, for example, Max Weber looked at the whole notion of bureaucracy and was able to delineate its key concepts that make it a bureaucracy. So that's an example of ontological work. Epistemology is the study of the nature of knowledge and helps us to justify our belief. That is, it's the study of how we know what we think we know about physical and social phenomena. It's the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief in X, Y, or Z from opinion about X, Y, or Z. In academic work, from a Western perspective, there is an emphasis on justifying a knowledge claim that we make through citing recognized experts in that field of study and or providing information about the validity or trustworthiness of that knowledge claim through our own research that has been reviewed by peers and so on. In our daily lives, personal experience is an important source of data, but may be problematic in academia if it cannot be verified through acceptable proofs, that is, information that provides acceptable confirmation that we know what we think we know. And in a day in which truthiness and alternative facts seem at times to be driving policymaking and public and political action, we can see the importance of epistemological rigor. However, we can also see that other life worlds and forms of knowledge may not find legitimacy within certain epistemological norms, and this is the issue that particularly Steinhauer addresses in her paper. Pardon me. Last is methodology, which is the systematic, theoretical analysis of the methods applied to a field of study. For those of us doing research, there is a necessity to go through the process of choosing a theoretical approach to your research. And then, after you've chosen that theoretical approach, thinking through and presenting that theoretical approach and your rationale for its choice in light of your research question. And then those methods are reflected in the methodology that you choose and use to rigorously explore your research question. We'll continue to talk about methodology and methods during the course, but Guba and Lincoln provide an essential grounding in that investigation. So those three concepts, I hope, are a little clearer, and they will be addressed as well by Guba and Lincoln. One of the key items that Guba and Lincoln consider is the notion of paradigm. That is an umbrella or overarching concept that encompasses ontology, epistemology, and methodology. I understand a paradigm to be a distinct set of concepts and thought patterns that guide the choices we make and what is accepted as credible. In the context of research, a paradigm is related to the researcher's basic belief system or worldview. And we see that in the contrasting views of Guba and Lincoln, as well as Steinhauer and Donald. Their basic belief system and worldview guide the choices made by them because of their fundamental beliefs and values about research, about knowledge, and about the phenomenon under investigation, and the ontology and epistemology from which those choices spring. A paradigm, then, encompasses the theories and research methods, as well as the postulates or claims made by the researcher, and the standards by which the validity of that research is judged. In research, the dominant paradigm, then, includes the convictions and beliefs of the discipline for what constitutes acceptable research. So an example of that in action would be, for example, when you submit an article to a journal. A journal is going to reflect, a journal is going to reflect the dominant paradigm of the times. And that will become the acceptable norms that are expected from the articles that are submitted. If someone is stepping outside of that paradigm, that article may not be accepted. So we see the power of paradigms to shape thought, to shape action in very predictable and powerful ways. But paradigms do shift. And Thomas Kuhn wrote about this phenomenon of shifting paradigms in 1962, which is telling because, of course, this was a time of social unrest and great questioning of the social, political, and economic status quo. He was writing from within the context of what we might call the hard sciences, where many of the conventions were being questioned at this time as well. I was, alive during the 1960s, and you may have read about, the wild times in the 1960s, because it was a time when everything was being questioned. The social norms were being questioned everywhere, and because of that, it's not surprising that Kuhn is looking at this in the context of those shifting times, because it was happening even in the sciences, for example. As he observed this phenomenon in science, he appropriated the term paradigm, meaning an example, model, or pattern, and devised the term paradigm shift. That is, the accepted norm, model, paradigm had shifted or changed. Of course, the word paradigm and paradigm shift have been taken up by popular culture, and the meaning has been somewhat obscure just because it's become so popularized. But Kuhn's concept has been very important in understanding how shifts occur over time in the study and understanding of natural and social phenomena. I saw this up close and personal, actually, when I was doing my master's in the 90s. And I began to hear about the Greenfield-Griffiths debate that was still, even in the 90s, very predominant in the field of educational administration and policy. And that paradigm shift began actually in 1974. And that what became known as the Greenfield-Griffiths debate demonstrates the ways in which a paradigm shift occurs in education research and its importance in shifting the research possibilities and enhanced understandings in the study of, in this case, educational administration and leadership. Greenfield, like Griffiths, was a quantitative researcher. Both of them had a very significant reputation within their field. Griffiths in the US, so his reach was broader because of the larger population, and Greenfield in Canada, and over time in Australia and England. Greenfield was a professor at the University of Alberta for many years, and then he went to UBC and then to OISE at the University of Toronto, my alma mater actually. He was studying measurable phenomena. For example, measuring variables of principals' actions in relation to student success using quantitative analysis. But he had become interested in interpretivism, which was a quite influential European philosophical position. And being of a great curious mind, he, on sabbatical, he decided that he would study interpretivism and went to Europe, studied under some of the great philosophers of the time, and began to rethink how he did his research. So instead of doing quantitative analysis of the cause-effect of a principal's actions in relation to student success, he began to ask more phenomenological questions like, how might we understand the role of a principal? How might the role of power in organizations be understood? So in 1974, he presented at an international conference in Bristol, England, and that presentation was attended by Griffiths and a huge group of people, from what I understand from those who were there, all of whose work was still firmly in the positivist camp, particularly Griffiths, whose reputation was built on positivism. Griffiths did not respond well, it is said, to what he perceived as an unwelcome paradigm shift by Greenfield, and let his feelings be known loud, very loud apparently, and very clearly, that this was not a welcome presentation. And from that point on, Greenfield was largely shunned for many years, and his publications were few, not because he wasn't publishing, he wasn't writing articles, but they weren't being accepted in the journals that operated within a different paradigm. But he began to be accepted more in the UK and Australia, and his work began to find an audience sometimes through his students who began to publish interpretivist work. So gradually, with these inroads into this fortress of positivism that had been educational administration, changes began to occur. His work opened up opportunities to shift the focus from generalizable explanations supported by statistical evidence to more existential questions that helped teachers and school leaders understand the social context in which they were engaged, and in so doing enabled more informed action that was particular to the context. Over time, the paradigm his work represented became more acceptable and is commonly used now in admin and leadership scholarship. What the Greenfield-Griffiths debate represents is a paradigmatic shift in which the predominant methodological approach was positivist, scientific, quantitative. There had been paradigmatic rumblings, however, as curriculum studies became more and more open to qualitative approaches to research, for example. But the academic fields of educational administration and leadership, as well as educational psychology and faculties of education, hung tough until almost the end of the 1990s, when the paradigm shift began to occur with the work of Tom Greenfield, as we've mentioned, and a growing number of critical theorists in the field of edmin, along with curriculum theorists. Pardon, I apologize for my voice. Goob and Lincoln then considered the paradigm shift from quantitative to qualitative research happening in educational research. While the quantitative paradigm was still dominant when they wrote this paper, and had been for some time, their work was considered absolutely revolutionary. While there had been researchers in education doing qualitative work, there hadn't been a rigorous philosophical examination of this shift and its worth until their work was published in 1994. And their work helped in validating new approaches to educational research and pushing forward the paradigmatic shift to qualitative work. But not without vigorous debate and outright resistance, all characteristics, according to Kuhn, of paradigm shifts. I happened to be a student in the middle of this paradigm shift from 1993 to 1995 when I was doing my master's at Westerns. And I had decided to do a phenomenological study, an interpretive study. And because of the question that I was asking, I just couldn't see any other approach having validity. And so I broached this approach with some very influential professors in educational administration at the university that I had been working with. And they were shocked and chagrined and were not very happy with my choice. And so we used to have, because I was doing a thesis, we had to meet, I think it was every Saturday or every second Saturday, I can't remember now, to, talk about where we were in our studies and the work that we were doing, get advice from the professors who were in attendance, and and work our way forward with some accountability to one another. And it was a very interesting approach to moving us along in our work. But because I was the outlier, it was a very uncomfortable space for me. And I got lots of flack and feedback. I really did. And I used to attend these get-togethers on the Saturday morning. And after it was all over and I was feeling kind of beaten up, I'd go to my office and I'd have a little cry, a few little tears run down my cheeks. And then I'd get a little bit mad and I'd think, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to do some more work. And off to the library I'd go. And I'd be preparing to be ready for the next onslaught at the next meeting. And gradually over time, with a lot of hard work, and a lot more dissension and judgment of my work than anybody else was privy to, I eventually won them over, and they agreed that this was a legitimate approach. But as I said, it took a lot of work. So this paradigmatic shift is a very real thing, and it's a very interesting space to be in when you're doing your research. Okay, I'll move on quickly from here and consider the outline or skeleton of the arguments that Guba and Lincoln present in this article, beginning with their critiques of quantitative research in education. As already mentioned, quantitative research was, and still is to a far lesser degree, the dominant form of inquiry in the physical as well as some of the social sciences, including education, particularly in influential fields of study like educational psychology. However, as a new paradigm began to emerge, not surprisingly, critiques emerged as well of what had been the dominant form of doing research up until then. So some of the internal critiques of positivism included the critique that positivism caused what Guba and Lincoln call context stripping. That is, you in positivist work, you were meant to step outside of the boundaries of the context in which the phenomenon was occurring and study only the phenomenon itself with all other variables pushed to the side. But the critique of that was that in doing that, there was an exclusion of meaning and purpose and a disjunction of grand theories with local contexts, which created an inapplicability of general to the specific. That is, the research didn't make sense in various contexts because it was too general and it couldn't be applied specifically to the context in which the phenomenon was occurring. So, so this was of significant concern. But there were also external critiques following on the internal critiques. Guba and Lincoln argue that these critiques were the tipping point. Facts seen as value-free which is core to quantitative research, was questioned by qualitative researchers who argued that facts are socially constructed and contextually determined. That is why, while it might be entirely predictable that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius in the physical sciences, the point at which social phenomena occur is a different kind of fact in the social sciences. For example, we know that social environment has a great deal to do with educational success, but it's impossible to predict the degree to which that fact will become reality, if at all, in all cases. So facts, that is, it was non-generalizable. So facts within a qualitative paradigm must be examined very differently and cannot be predicted and then verified nor generalized as they are in quantitative analysis. Both sets of critiques were very influential, but the second set proved to be the tipping point for paradigmatic change. Goop and Lincoln argue that as a result of this opening up, there are four major paradigmatic approaches to research. Positivism, that is, inquiry that relies on observation and quantifiable analysis to determine reality. Post-positivism, which comes out of positivism, but recognizes that truth is fallible and cannot be verified in any final sense. So, for example, when the COVID vaccines were being produced, they were produced based on the knowledge that was present at the time. And then as more knowledge was gained, further proofs were available, and therefore things, shifted slightly as a result of a response to that. So there was a recognition that truth, as it was initially understood, was fallible and it cannot be verified in any final sense. It's not that it's wrong, it's what we know at the time. In the social sciences, this opens up greater opportunities for limited contextual analysis. Then in the qualitative, so post-positivism was actually kind of a nice step sort of between positivism and some of the other methods that were available, that became available. Then in the qualitative realm, we have critical theory, which has as its goal emancipation from social norms that limit fair opportunities for all. I beg your pardon. And constructivism or naturalism that comes out of interpretivist philosophical traditions that may be emancipatory, but are focused primarily on understanding what is, and in that sense are ontological. Again, check out the videos for more information. Each paradigm lends itself to particular kinds of methods that are multiple, but may be considered under the general umbrella of quantitative and qualitative methods. There's also, I'm not going to get into this because it just becomes really muddy very quickly, but I just want to acknowledge that there is also a growing body of work using postmodernism and post-structuralism that can be seen arguably as related to critical theory, if emancipatory, but may arguably be seen as outside conventional theory. So that's why I'm not including it here. Since Goop and Lincoln developed this typology of paradigmatic streams, others have challenged them, including indigenous scholars who do not and do not want to fit neatly into what Donald terms colonial logics. In some ways, critical theory and forms of constructivism such as phenomenology come closest but do not directly address cultural particularities. However, as a way of combating the determinism of colonial logics in our research and pedagogical practices, their work is very instructive in providing a glimpse into their important rethinking of dominant research norms. Basil Johnson, an Ojibwe elder and an anthropologist, is being quoted here, and I think it's so apropos of what Steinhauer and Donald talk about. He says, if the Native peoples and their heritage are to be understood, the goal of research as a matter of fact, it is their beliefs, insights, concepts, ideals, values, attitudes, and codes that must be studied. And there is, I submit, no better way of gaining that understanding than by examining Native ceremonies, rituals, songs, dances, prayers, and stories. For it is in ceremony, ritual, song, dance, and prayer, that the sum total of what people believe about life, being, existence, and relationships are symbolically expressed and articulated, as it is in story, fable, legend, and myth, that fundamental understandings, insights, and attitudes toward life and human conduct, character, and quality in their diverse forms are embodied and passed on. This quote from Johnson in many ways gets to the heart of both Steinhauer's and Duane Donald's more recent paper on Métissage, in which they both explore ontology, epistemology, and methodology from an Indigenous perspective. In both cases, they reference stories and the importance of ceremony, ritual, song, dance, and prayer as core to their approach to research that is informed by and explores Indigenous ontology, epistemology, and points to culturally appropriate methodologies. In both papers, they argue against the atomization or breaking apart of human experience and argue for a holistic approach as an ethical necessity. Donald offers a methodology that provides not only a way to better come to an understanding of Indigenous contexts, stories, and experiences, but also a way to do so that moves away from colonial logic by a form of researching that he calls métissage, which offers through story, located in shared place, a new way of living with one another across difference. Steinhauer provides a wide lens and explores Indigenous scholars' views on Indigenous research. In both, we catch a glimpse of the ontological, epistemological, and methodological possibilities of Indigenous-led research that leads to good research, research that enlightens, enriches, and builds bridges among and between communities of difference. They also explore the possibility of Indigenous scholars as essential to the work of researching in Indigenous contexts. So I'll conclude there, and thank you for your patience in watching this much longer than usual video. And as always, if you have any questions about anything in this module or on this video, please let me know.